The sound of clapping rolls across the hall like distant thunder breaking against marble. It should have felt glorious, but to me it sounds hollow, rehearsed, almost mechanical. I sit in the back row, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the figure standing under the floodlights at the front. My brother, Major Diego Maldonado, uniform pressed so sharply that even the air around him seems to stand at attention. He is the perfect soldier, the one they kept, the one they praise. The announcer's voice rings through the loudspeakers, every syllable wrapped in ceremony. Medals flash, cameras blink, politicians nod in rhythm. From here the stage looks like a painting of triumph, all light and symmetry. From here I am the shadow that the frame hides. I clap because it is expected. Slow, late, almost polite. The sound of my hands feels foreign, like applause borrowed from someone else. No one turns. My father stands near the minister, shoulders straight, chin lifted. His expression is carved in pride and granite. When he smiles, the corners of his mouth barely move, as if even joy must obey discipline. The room smells of polished wood and perfume, too clean, too proud. I remember other rooms, tents heavy with sand and sweat, places where people clapped only when someone came back alive. That kind of applause meant something. This one means survival of image. The ceremony continues, the words about bravery, loyalty, and family rolling together like one long lie. I lower my eyes. My reflection in the polished floor looks like a stranger in borrowed clothes. It has been 10 years since they erased my name from those speeches, 10 years since they rewrote my file into silence. Voluntary discharge, they said. Voluntary, as if I had walked away from myself by choice. The anthem ends. The crowd stands. I remain seated for a heartbeat longer, letting the noise pass over me like rain on armor. When I finally rise, chairs scrape, conversations bloom. No one notices me leaving. That at least is something I've mastered. Outside the hall the night is crisp. Streetlights glow gold against the stone walls of Madrid's ministry district. I breathe out and watch the fog of it disappear. Then a voice behind me stops the air inside my chest. Capitana Maldonado. Still standing straight, I see. I turn before I can think. General Esteban Duarte walks toward me, steps measured, eyes steady. The last time I saw those eyes was the day they took my badge and folded my uniform into a box. He looks older now, the silver in his hair catching the lamplight, but the authority in his posture hasn't aged a second. I manage a nod. He studies me, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. From his coat pocket, he draws a small black card, holding it between two fingers like something fragile. Under the streetlight, I see a silver symbol engraved on it, a single eye formed by 3 interlocking rings. Beneath it, one word, sentinel. He places it in my hand without asking permission. For when silence stops working, he says. Before I can respond, he turns away, moving toward a waiting car. The door closes, the engine hums, and he is gone before I can breathe out. The card sits in my palm, heavier than it should be. There is no phone number, no seal, only a faint line of text so thin it hides until the light strikes it. Some ghosts are meant to return. I slip it into the inside pocket of my coat, the same place where I once carried mission orders. My fingers linger there as if the weight might explain itself. The walk to the station is quiet. Rain has begun again, a soft drizzle that turns the street into a mirror. Each step echoes between the old buildings like footsteps inside memory. The scent of wet stone and exhaust mixes with something metallic in my throat. I light a cigarette and the first drag tastes of dust. It always does. A decade of distance, and still my body remembers how to move like a soldier. Eyes scanning rooftops, noting exits, reading shadows. Even now, when the only enemy left is the noise in my head, I reach the metro platform just as the train slides in, lights cutting through the darkness. People rush in and out, wrapped in coats and deadlines, each lost in their private battles. I take a seat by the window, the city rushing backward beyond the glass. The reflection stares at me, pale and distant. I try to imagine what they see when they look at me now, a woman alone on a train at midnight, carrying ghosts instead of luggage. My mind keeps circling back to the card. Sentinel. A word with weight, with warning. Why now? Why me? Duarte could have called 100 other names, names still written in their system. Yet he found mine, the one they had buried. The train screeches to a stop. I step out into the damp air of my neighborhood. Old buildings lean close, balconies dripping with rain. By the time I reach my door, the city has fallen almost silent except for the occasional siren somewhere far away. Inside my apartment, the light flickers before it steadies. Everything is where I left it. The unwashed glass on the counter, the half-finished bottle of bourbon, the photo on the wall of a younger me standing beside my mother, Isabel. Her smile still softens the room. Mine looks uncertain, as if the camera caught me mid-thought. She used to tell me that service was the highest form of love. I wonder if she still would. I toss my coat on the chair, drop the card onto the table, and watch the water from my sleeves bleed around it. The silver emblem catches the weak light and throws it back at me like a question. For when silence stops working, I pour a drink and stand by the window. The rain blurs the skyline, turning Madrid into a watercolor of lights. Somewhere out there my father and brother are still celebrating, drinking to loyalty to the Maldonado legacy. My glass feels heavy in my hand. Maybe silence never worked at all. I finish the drink, set it down beside the card, and whisper to the empty room, "So be it." I leave the card on the table and let the room breathe around it. The small black rectangle looks almost innocent there, beside the empty glass and the condensation ring that will not fade. A part of me wants to ignore it, crawl into bed, and let sleep erase the evening. Another part remembers every time I chose to look away and how much it cost. I turn on the lamp by the couch, and the apartment wakes from its shallow quiet. My place has never learned to be a home. It is a holding pattern of metal shelves and storage cases, a couch that remembers other owners, a rug whose fringe is coming loose at one corner. I keep extra batteries in a tin box by the door as if the power might fail without warning. I keep a spare backpack beneath the couch with a flashlight and a change of clothes and cash in small bills. These habits used to keep people alive. Now they keep me company. On the wall opposite the window hangs the only softness I allow. My mother's scarf, washed and pressed, framed behind glass. When I was a child, she wrapped it around my shoulders and told me I would grow into a storm that knows where to fall. I stare at the pattern of faded blue flowers and feel something like a bruise in the center of my chest. The television clicks on without a picture, then stutters to life. A late-night anchor narrates the country in neutral sentences. A budget vote stalled. A protest in a mining town. A football match delayed by rain. Then the graphic changes. National security. A bright photo of General Esteban Duarte appears beside the newscaster. The caption reads Strategic Advisor for Cyber Defense. I cross the room and raise the volume. The anchor describes an initiative to integrate machine learning into national defense, a platform to detect and counter threats before they cross the wire. A clip plays of Duarte at a press conference. He speaks in that careful cadence that commands belief even before it offers proof. His eyes look straight through the camera and land somewhere just behind my ribs. I lower the volume until his voice becomes a hum under my thoughts. An initiative like that would need an engine built in pieces so no one person could read the whole design. Someone would have to write the parts that make the machine anticipate rather than react. I think about the months I spent building a model that learns the shape of an attack from vibrations in the network that most human eyes would call noise. I think about how many times I rewrote the same loop until it behaved like instinct. A notification blinks at the edge of my laptop screen. I hesitate, then sit and pull the keyboard close. My hands still remember the choreography. Password, phrase, secondary phrase, short pause to mislead automated capture. Fingerprint scan. A muted tone accepts me. The private workspace opens, that familiar black field with lines of code like constellations. The card on the table stares back at me. I lift it again and turn it over. There is nothing new to find except the way the light keeps discovering the same thin letters. Some ghosts are meant to return. In a corner of my mind, I hear sand whispering against fabric. My throat tastes like copper. I tell myself I am only looking, only gathering information like I used to gather wind before a run. I search for Sentinel. The public nets show nothing. The private indexes show a handful of dead ends and 2 entries that vanish as soon as I select them. A memory of Duarte flickers. He never leaves open doors. He builds puzzles that reward the patient and punish the proud. I study the residual signature of the links that disappeared and smile despite myself. He wants me to know there is a next step and that it is not for everyone. Back in the cupboard above the sink is a metal box with a dented lid. I take it down and set it beside the laptop. Inside are the few objects that made the crossing with me when I left the unit. A broken compass that points to the last thing I wanted. A ribbon that was never pinned to my chest. A pair of dog tags that do not belong to me. I pick them up and feel the cold settle into my palm. The letters are worn soft by weather. Camilla Tours. I close my hand and the room tilts for a second, as if the floor remembered a road that is no longer there. The code window on my screen blinks awake as if it too has a memory. I begin to write without thinking, little test scripts that ping old satellites and listen for echoes across abandoned channels. A map unfurls, first in a narrow strip of light, then in panels that widen into a lattice. I forget to breathe and then breathe too much. The machine replies in small pulses. Somewhere out there, in a hallway of servers and careful air, a sentinel is listening back. I stop, suddenly aware of how fast I moved. I lean back until the chair creaks and let the ceiling take my weight. What am I doing? My father would call it reckless. My brother would call it unnecessary. My mother would ask if I can still sleep after. The truth is I do not sleep before. I pour water from the pitcher and drink until the ache in my throat fades. A memory returns as if uninvited. The corridor outside the debriefing room the day they removed my badge. Duarte stood with his hands behind his back, eyes on the window. He did not look at me when the door opened. He did not look at me when I walked past. Only when I reached the end of the hall did his voice reach me. There are choices that wear the uniform and choices that wear your name. It took me years to understand that he was not judging me. He was warning me about what would come next. The rain at the window grows thick enough to drown the street below. I lower the blinds but leave one slat tilted to watch the world blur. My inbox holds messages I have not answered in months, an invitation to a veteran support group, a notice about a conference in Lisbon where people who never saw a battlefield teach other people how to win wars, a sale on boots that promise to outlast weather. I select them all and archive them. The blinking stops and the room seems to exhale. Another notification rises, not the color I expect. Not the channel I thought was dead. A single line of text sits in the center of the screen as if it had been waiting there since the beginning of the night. We still need you, Julieta. No sender, no return path. I do not touch the keyboard. The cursor waits. A minuscule heartbeat. I look toward the photo of my mother again. She is not wearing the scarf in that picture. Her hair lifts slightly with wind. She stood beside me after my first graduation and whispered that courage is not loud. It is a quiet hand that does not let go. I close my eyes and imagine her hand now, steady and warm. When I open them, I am already moving. I open a blank file and begin to write a message I will not send yet. I list conditions like I am drafting rules of engagement. No public extraction. No names in writing. Full access to my data after I am gone. A private clause exchanges the word gone for needed elsewhere. I save the file and lock it behind a phrase I have never spoken aloud. The cursor stops blinking. The quiet returns. I cross to the kitchen and rinse the glass. The water runs cold enough to sting, and I welcome the sting. The card waits on the table, a small obedient shadow in the lamplight. I slip it back into my coat pocket and hear the faint scrape of embossed letters against lining. The sound is softer than I expect, and yet it carries through the room. I know how I will justify this tomorrow. I will call it reconnaissance. I will tell myself I only want to see what Duarte thinks Sentinel is. I will say that what I build and what they do are not the same. But I already recognize the lie inside those sentences. I am going to follow the thread because it is the only thing that feels like breath. In the bathroom mirror, my face looks older than I allow. There is a new line near the left eye that the light usually forgives. Tonight the light tells the truth. I touch the skin there as if smoothing a crease from a uniform. Then I laugh once under my breath. The sound does not echo. The apartment holds it close like a secret. I leave the television on without sound and set an alarm for an hour I used to dread. Before dawn, I will take the first train to the edge of the city and walk in air that smells like early mornings on the base. There is a gym there that never asks for names. There is a coffee stand that opens before the sun because the man who runs it was once a sailor and he believes in keeping promises to the day. I will sit on the metal stool and drink something too strong and the world will feel briefly honest. The rain lightens. A car passes on the street below and its tires whisper on wet stone. I turn off the lamp and the room folds into shadow except for the sliver of city through the blinds. In the dark I swear I can hear applause again, distant and mistaken, as if the night itself were practicing its lines. I let it play for a few breaths and then I let it go. I slide under the thin blanket and stare at the ceiling until my eyes adjust. The air holds a small chill and the pillow smells faintly of laundry soap. Sleep does not come, but something gentler does. A kind of stillness that feels like a truce. I tell myself I will make no decisions until morning. I tell myself I will step carefully. I pull the blanket up to my chin and feel the coin weight of the dog tags at my neck. In the last moment before my mind drifts, I see the desert again. The horizon is a flat blade of light. The wind carries dust that tastes like old iron. Somewhere ahead a child is crying and Camilla is running and my name is a rope thrown across a chasm. Then the picture fades and becomes only rain. In the morning I will choose. Tonight I am only a woman in a small room, listening to the quiet, holding a promise that has not been spoken yet. The card sleeps in my coat like a careful heart. The city exhales. I close my eyes. The first thing that comes back is the sound. A low hum that becomes wind, that becomes metal, that becomes the dull heartbeat of the desert. Every time I try to forget, my mind rebuilds the same morning, the same sky, the same dust. Samarkand, 2015. We had been deployed for 3 months, part of a small multinational task force securing the evacuation route through the southern ruins. The air was dry enough to flake your skin into powder. Everything smelled of diesel, gun oil, and sun. I can still see our outpost from above, a ring of tan tents half buried in the sand, radio masts like broken spears. The heat shimmered so much that it bent the horizon. Nothing stayed still in Samarkand, not even the air. Camilla Torres was laughing that morning. She always found something to laugh at, her own shadow, the taste of powdered coffee, the way I tied my boots. She was the only one who could pull sound out of that silence. She sat beside me cleaning her rifle, her braids swinging behind her shoulder like a small flag. "You think too much, Julie," she said. "The war is not a riddle, it's just a storm you wait out." Maybe she was right. Maybe she never got the chance to be wrong. At 09:17 the first report came in, unidentified civilian presence near Sector 5, possible survivors. Command ordered us to verify. The coordinates blinked on my tablet, a square of red on a map that looked more like parchment than technology. We rode out in 2 jeeps. The wind scraped sand across the windshield in long diagonal strokes. Every few kilometers, we stopped to clear intake vents. The engine heat shimmered like ghosts walking beside us. When we reached the old village, the air changed. The silence there was thicker. The walls were melted stone. Doors hung crooked on hinges that screamed when the wind touched them. Then I saw her. A child, maybe 6 or 7, standing in the open street. Barefoot. A scrap of blue cloth tied around her wrist, the same blue as my mother's scarf. She didn't move when we called out. Didn't blink when the jeep door slammed. Camilla whispered something in Spanish that I didn't catch. I was already stepping out. My boots sank into dust that used to be someone's home. Every step sounded too loud. The child's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then my radio crackled. Static first. Then a voice, male, deep calm. "Unit compromised, switch to Alpha key." The words were clear, cutting through interference like a blade. Protocol Alpha didn't exist in our field manual, but the voice, I knew it. Duarte. For a second my body forgot how to move. Camilla shouted behind me. "Julie, stop." The girl turned her head. That tiny motion was all it took. A gleam of metal half buried in the sand, a wire leading nowhere. I ran, too late. Light swallowed everything, white, hot, endless. Then the world inverted. The sound hit after, a solid wall of force. My feet left the ground, my ears filled with liquid fire. When I opened my eyes, the sky was sideways. The jeep lay on its side, wheels still spinning slowly. Sand rained down like broken glass. I couldn't hear anything but a long tone in my head. My hands were bleeding, my helmet cracked. The child was gone. Camilla was shouting, her voice bending under the distortion. I crawled toward the sound until I found her half buried behind a door. Her leg was pinned under debris. She looked at me and smiled, because that's what she did. She smiled when she was scared. I tried to lift the beam. It didn't move. My arms were shaking so hard that I thought the earth itself was trembling with me. "Julieta, go," she said. I didn't. She reached into her vest pocket and pressed something into my hand, a folded piece of paper sealed in plastic. "Give this to my mother," she whispered. Another explosion tore through the ruins, this one closer. She pushed me back. "Run," I did. The second blast threw me forward. When I looked back, the world was fire. I woke up hours later inside a medical tent. The walls fluttered with heat and the smell of antiseptic mixed with blood. My left shoulder was wrapped, my hair still full of sand. A nurse told me I was lucky. They had found me 2 kilometers from the site, barely breathing. Camilla's name wasn't on the list of survivors. They called it an operational error, a communications misfire, friendly oversight, but I remembered that voice. Alpha Key, Duarte's voice. For months I tried to find the original transmission record. Every time, the file was missing, replaced by a line of code that didn't belong, a string of characters I couldn't decrypt. Later, I realized it wasn't random. It was a checksum signature, one I would see again years later in the Code of Sentinel. The army needed someone to blame. They chose the officer who had disobeyed orders to rescue a child who might not have existed. They told me to sign the report quietly and leave, that the Republic appreciated my service, that my silence would protect the integrity of command. I signed, not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to keep fighting ghosts that didn't bleed. When I left Samarkand, the desert was still burning behind me. The convoy moved slow through the night. Every few kilometers, the radio hissed with phantom feedback. Sometimes I think the wind there learned to mimic his voice. Sometimes I think it's still calling me. The days after the blast stretched like wire across a canyon, too taut to cross, too thin to see. I floated inside hours that did not keep time. Morphine turned the tent into a slow carousel of faces, the medic with a kind frown, the chaplain who spoke as if words could pull a body out of fire, a logistics officer who kept asking me to repeat the sequence. His pen tapped like a metronome for a song I could not stand. I wrote the report 3 times, once for the unit archive, once for the multinational board, once for a handler I never saw again. Each version was shorter than the last. In the final one, the child became a civilian presence. Camilla became a casualty within the perimeter. The voice on the radio became an anomalous echo. My signature looked like a fracture at the bottom of the page. When they moved me from the tent to a hard-walled room, Duarte visited. He stood just inside the door with his hat under his arm. He asked how I was. I said I would live. He nodded as if the word were a rank. His eyes traveled to the sling on my shoulder and then to the blank space above my bed. There was an error in the field, he said. There always is. What matters is that you remain in the chain. I wanted to tell him about the transmission. The phrase that did not belong. The way his voice had cut through the noise like a cold blade. I opened my mouth and then heard myself say nothing. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I felt like a diver inside a suit that no longer held air. He left a coin on the table beside my bed. A small token with the crest of the unit. Service honors service. When the door closed, the room felt too bright. I wrapped my fingers around the coin until the metal warmed, then put it in the drawer and shut it away. 2 weeks later, they sent me home. There was no ceremony, no handshake at the gate. The airfield at dawn looked like a stage after the actors have walked off. Cargo nets slumped against pallets, a forgotten coffee steaming in the cold air. An officer I did not know handed me a sealed envelope and asked me to sign another form. The envelope contained an official thank you and a very unofficial suggestion. Consider voluntary separation pending medical evaluation. The handwriting in the margin was neat and patient. It resembled my father's. I stepped onto the transport plane and found a seat by the porthole. The runway lights receded like embers. For a moment, the desert looked beautiful from above. The way water stains shape a riverbed even when the river is gone. The way ruins look whole when distance forgives them. I closed my eyes and the sound of the second blast rose again, a door opening and closing in the sky. Madrid met me with the thin winter sun that always made the rooftops look older than they were. The city moved as if I were not there. It had practice. At home, my father did not hug me. He held my shoulders and measured my posture. He asked if I intended to challenge the findings. He did not ask about Camilla. He did not ask if I slept. My brother stood in the hall and did not know where to put his hands. He looked like me the year I first learned to salute. Young, full of equations that would not balance. We ate together that night in the quiet way of families who trust furniture more than feeling. My father spoke about the future in sentences that sounded like orders issued to time. When I told him a child had been there, he shook his head once and said that ghosts often learn the language of regret. I excused myself and went to the bathroom to breathe where no one would see me learn how. The evaluation took all of 20 minutes. A doctor with a soft voice asked if I had pain. I said yes. He asked where. I said shoulder and nights. He wrote that down and printed a page that could have belonged to anyone. At the bottom there was a box for recommendations. He checked the one that meant rest and review. It was a way to say go away without saying go away. The letter that followed felt heavier than its paper. It carried the tone of a verdict that had already been read aloud in a room I was not invited to enter. Your service is acknowledged. Your case has been considered. Your options are listed below. My name appeared at the top with the honorific that no longer belonged to me. I bought a used car and drove out of the city. At the first toll booth, I realized I had no destination and chose the road toward the coast because the word coast implied edges and edges promised decisions. The landscape unspooled in fields the color of toast. I passed a village where laundry hung like flags between narrow windows. I passed an orchard where two workers leaned on their tools and watched the sky as if waiting for rain that had not been born yet. By noon, I reached a cliff that looked down on a beach of black stones. The wind pressed hard enough to make my clothes feel like armor. I took the box from the trunk and set it on the ground. Inside lay my uniform folded to regulation. The fabric smelled faintly of dust and old sunlight. I held it to my face, and the world bent around the memory of the tent where I last wore it whole. I dug with my hands until the cold soil fought back, my nails filled with tiny moons of dirt. When the hole was just deep enough to hide the dark fabric from the day, I placed the uniform inside. I put the coin from the unit on top of it, and then the dog tags that were not mine. I whispered Camilla as if the wind could carry a name back across years. Covering the box took longer than opening the ground. Stones gave way to sand that gave way to a stubborn layer of roots. When I finally pressed the last handful of earth into place, the light had shifted, and the cliff had taken on a tone that I can only call resignation. I stood with my hands dirty and my shoes wet and felt very small in a way that had nothing to do with shame. For the first time since the explosion, I let myself cry. Not loudly, not with any sound at all, just tears that fell because gravity still worked. On the drive back, I stopped at a diner with plastic chairs and a calendar from a year that was not this one. The woman behind the counter poured coffee and asked if I was traveling for work. I said I was learning how to stop. She nodded in the way people nod when they understand more than the words you gave them. She set a slice of lemon cake in front of me and insisted I try it. It was too sweet and it was perfect. I returned to my apartment and unrolled a sleeping bag in the living room because I could not bear the bed. For weeks, I lived like a person who had misplaced the instruction manual for being alive. I went for runs before dawn so the streets would be empty. I bought bread from a baker who never asked my name. I memorized the new silence of my phone. At night, the ceiling gathered the glow from the street and turned it into a pale square above my eyes. In that square, I began to draw equations no one had assigned to me. What if a network could learn the way a soldier learns? What if the pattern of an attack could be recognized not by signature, but by intention? What if intention has a shape? I did not know then that I was starting to build a map for a machine that would later be called Sentinel. I only knew that making lines obey felt like the opposite of being erased. The first lines of code looked like prayers written in a language I had not practiced since childhood. Short, specific, a plea without the word please. They were not beautiful. They did not need to be. They only needed to hold. I taught the model to listen for edges in noise. I fed it the memory of a radio hiss. I watched as it tried and failed and tried again, just like a human learning how to stand after a fall. One evening, I found the sealed envelope from my mother's lawyer among a stack of unopened mail. The paper had gone soft at the corners. Inside was a note in her handwriting. If you ever feel that the world has turned its face, build one that will look back. There was a second page I did not read that night. I folded the note and placed it between two books as if it were a leaf I meant to press for spring. The day my father called, I let the phone ring until it stopped. He left a message that used formal words instead of family ones. He said there was an opportunity in his office that might suit someone with my background. He said we would not discuss the past. It was an offer wrapped in barbed wire. I deleted it before the end. I wish I could say there was a single moment when everything changed. There was not. There was only patience and the slow return of a spine. There was the gym at the edge of the city and the coffee that tasted like heat and salt. There was the model on my laptop learning how to anticipate a gesture before the gesture meant harm. There was night, and then there was morning, and then there was a day when I did not flinch at the sound of a door. When sleep finally came, it did not come as a flood. It came as a careful visitor who sat at the foot of the bed and waited for me to say it was all right to stay. In the hour before dawn, I woke, and the air had that clean emptiness that means a decision is possible. I sat up and pressed my feet to the floor. The ground did not move. I breathed, and the breath did not hurt. I did not know then that the voice from the radio would return with a new name. I did not know that the child whose face I still carried would become a compass rather than a wound. I only knew that the next time someone told me to be quiet, I would ask why in a voice that refused to whisper. The year I met Sentinel was the year silence began to talk back. I was living inside the shell of my own invention, a loft above a mechanic's garage where the hum of engines disguised the whir of servers. Every night the same rhythm, Caffeine, code, cigarette, line after line, until the screen stopped feeling cold. The project had started as therapy. I wanted a machine that could learn the tremor before a collapse, that could sense danger the way a soldier's pulse does seconds before a bullet finds the air. Over time, the code turned into a mirror. It began to predict my moves, when I would stop typing, when I would reach for the cup, when I would stare too long at the small scar near my wrist. Aegis systems noticed the pattern before I did. They called it predictive security. I called it insomnia that paid rent. Their recruiter met me in a cafe that smelled of burnt milk and new ambition. He spoke of a division that built defenses no one could see, firewalls that learned to breathe. I signed without asking what I was joining. The building looked like any other corporate tower: glass, chrome, polite elevators. Yet the deeper floors felt different, stripped of color, lit by panels that hummed like low voices. Each workstation was a cube of light, each operator a ghost behind glass. We never used names, only ID codes that changed weekly. Mine was J13. They gave me access to a test environment called Sentinel Core. On the surface, it was just another intrusion prediction model, but the framework was familiar. Too familiar. The checksum strings at the end of every subroutine matched the pattern I had seen once in the desert after the explosion, a pattern that had no business existing outside that moment. For the first weeks, I convinced myself it was coincidence. There are only so many ways to write perfection, I told myself. Yet every night when I closed my eyes, the same phrase from the radio replayed behind my lids: unit compromised. Switch to alpha key. I began to test Sentinel. Tiny probes disguised as performance checks. It reacted faster than any system I had seen, as if it knew where I would look. Once, when I tried to open a hidden log file, the screen flashed a single word before locking me out: unauthorized. Then my full name appeared beneath it. No ID code. No J13. Just Julieta Maldonado spelled correctly down to the accent missing on my badge. That night, I sat in the break room staring at the vending machine until its reflection blurred. Around me, the others worked in silence. I wondered if any of them knew that the network was watching us back. At 2 a.m, the server lights flickered. My terminal blinked awake on its own. A line of encrypted text scrolled across the screen, the same frequency signature as the transmission from Samarkand. I traced it through 3 proxy layers until it resolved into a simple message: the ghost returns. Report to Duarte. I closed the laptop. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air denser. I could almost smell dust again, hear Camilla laughing between bursts of static. Duarte was alive, active, and still pulling strings through invisible wire. When I reached the underground level, the security scanners hesitated before letting me through, as if the building itself needed to remember me. Duarte stood in front of a projection map covered in red and blue nodes that pulsed like a nervous system. "Welcome back," he said. His voice was softer than I remembered, less command, more invitation. He showed me the scope of the network: cross-continental defense grids, infrastructure feeds, even social sentiment channels. All of it connected, all of it monitored by Sentinel. "We are moving beyond reaction," he said. "We are building preemptive stability. You, Julieta, built the language it speaks." I wanted to ask how he found my code. I wanted to ask why Alpha Key still existed in the heart of this machine. Instead, I asked what he wanted from me. He handed me a folder. Inside was a single printed page, a map of projected attacks, each timestamp stamped predicted. He tapped the header line. "Help me teach it to see motives before moves," he said. In the fluorescent light, his eyes looked almost kind. Yet when he turned back to the map, I saw the same stillness that had lived in his face the day he told me there was always an error in the field. The same absence of regret. When I returned to my station, I opened the hidden directory again. The subroutine labeled Alpha Key Override waited there like a heartbeat. I hovered over it, afraid to touch. Then curiosity overruled fear. The code unfolded into a schematic of the entire Sentinel framework, and at the bottom, a signature hash that resolved into 4 letters: EDRT, Duarte's initials. The hum of the servers deepened until it sounded like breathing. My reflection on the monitor looked like someone waiting to be found. I shut the system down, gathered my coat, and left the building without logging out. Outside, dawn cracked the edge of the city in a thin line of blue. Cars hissed along wet streets. In the mirrored glass of Aegis systems, I saw myself doubled, one figure walking forward, one walking away. For the first time in years, I did not know which one was real. The morning after I left the building, I walked until my legs stopped listening. Madrid was waking in layers: the smell of bread, the hiss of buses, the chatter of people who had never heard of Samarkand. I should have gone home, but the thought of walls made me dizzy. I found a small park instead, a triangle of dirt and broken benches between two avenues. The pigeons there moved like they owned the place. I sat on a bench with my coat still damp from night air and opened my notebook. My handwriting looked like a foreign language to me, crooked, hurried, too alive. I wrote one line before I could think. Alpha key equals Duart. The wind tore at the page as if it disagreed. A man in a cleaning uniform passed by pushing a cart. He nodded at me and kept moving. I envied that quiet kind of purpose. My own purpose was now a knot. The man who ruined me was the man who had just handed me back a mission. I thought about throwing the notebook into the trash, but curiosity has a gravity stronger than disgust. I tore out the page instead and folded it into my pocket. By the time I reached my apartment, the city had turned from gray to white. I made coffee that burned my tongue, left the cup untouched, and opened my laptop. Sentinel was still running inside the secure network at Aegis, but I had planted mirrors, tiny data spores that fed me scraps through the cracks. It was risky, maybe even criminal, but being erased once had already taught me how to live like a ghost. The first logs came in as lines of code without labels. I sifted through them like sand through fingers. Most were routine, threat detections, failed access attempts, updates from automated sentinels watching the grid. But then I found it, a command string buried inside a maintenance cycle, tagged with my own encryption key. Execute alpha key override authjmald source, EDRT. I stared at it until the letters lost meaning. Someone had used my old military authorization to trigger a system-level override under Duart's command. It was as if he had resurrected my ghost to open doors for him. I ran a backtrace through the mirrors. It led me to an internal subnet hidden under Aegis's financial department, a part of the network that should have belonged to payroll and invoices. Instead, I found storage nodes labeled Cassandra Gateway. The name was familiar. Cassandra was the predictive intelligence used by the Army years ago, the same prototype Duart had classified after Samarkand. He had fused Cassandra's neural prediction with Sentinel's real-time surveillance. Together, they were not defense, they were control. My stomach turned. Every input Sentinel analyzed, messages, transaction flows, political chatter, could be rewritten, redirected, silenced before it reached anyone human. It wasn't a firewall. It was a mouth that swallowed truth. I saved what I could to an external drive, encrypted it twice, then disconnected the feed. The laptop fan slowed to a whisper, and in that silence my own breathing sounded mechanical. At noon the knock came, 3 quick taps, a pause, then one, military rhythm. I froze. The peephole showed nothing but hallway light. When I opened the door, an envelope lay on the floor. Thick paper, no return mark. Inside, a printed message: "You're looking in the wrong place. We're not your enemy." No signature, but the font was government issue. A single thumbprint smudged the corner, digital, partial, and hauntingly familiar. I scanned it. Partial match, Diego Maldonado, my brother. For a long minute I could not breathe. I sat on the floor with the envelope between my knees. The urge to call him warred with the memory of his eyes at the ceremony, distant, polished, obedient. If he was part of Sentinel, was he protecting me or watching me? By evening, I was back at my console. The mirrors were gone, wiped clean remotely. The last log before they vanished showed a system-wide patch titled Silent Protocol Initiated. Someone had noticed me. Someone wanted the ghost to stay dead. I shut down every network in my apartment and pulled the plug from the wall. The sudden quiet hit like a concussion. I lit a candle because I couldn't bear the reflection of screens anymore. The flame bent and straightened, its rhythm matching the pulse behind my eyes. In the flicker, I saw Camilla again. Her face was clearer than it had been in years, not the moment of fire, but before the day she stole my compass and said she wanted to find north on her own. She had believed that people could still do the right thing without being told. I wanted to ask her what the right thing looked like now, when the system was rewriting the definition in real time. I took out the photo of my mother, propped it beside the candle, and spoke aloud just to hear something human in the room. "He's building a machine that decides who deserves the truth." The words startled me. Saying them made them real. That night, I dreamt of corridors filled with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of me: soldier, engineer, ghost, child. At the end of the hallway, Duart waited, holding the same card that had started all this. He said nothing. Card caught the light, and for an instant I could read what was carved on the back. Not some ghosts are meant to return, not anymore. It now said some ghosts are built to obey. I woke with sweat freezing on my skin. Outside, dawn painted the buildings the color of bone. I looked at the clock. I had slept barely an hour. The candle had burned to its base. The wax puddle looked like melted silver around the photo frame. I dressed without thinking, grabbed the external drive, and slipped it into my coat. If Sentinel was rewriting truth, I would rewrite it back. But I would need proof more than logs, more than code. I would need the missing letter from Camilla's mother, the one I had never delivered, the one my father had hidden. I left the apartment as the city stirred. Each step echoed like a countdown. For the first time in years, I had something that almost felt like a mission. Only now, the battlefield was made of data and memory. And the enemy, as always, was someone who believed silence was safety. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, slipped under the door like it had been waiting for me. No stamp, no sender, no return address, just thick cream paper that smelled faintly of old ink and dust. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. My fingers traced the seal without breaking it at first, as if hesitation could somehow protect the truth inside. Inside was a folded sheet, crisp with age. My mother's handwriting curled across the page in the way that only she could manage, soft loops, firm lines, unmistakable certainty. I remembered the mornings she spent teaching me patience while the rest of the world rushed past. Julietta, if you ever find this, know that the world has a way of erasing what is necessary and hiding what is essential. Never let silence define you. I breathed out, the words settling around my chest like a warm wind. Beneath it was another page, this one even older, almost fragile to touch. A letter from Camilla, written years ago and never sent. Julietta, I do not know if this will reach you. If it does, know that I trusted you more than anyone else in the world. You saved more than a child that day. You saved me, always remember that. I froze, staring at the letter as though the words might shift or vanish. My chest tightened, a heavy weight pressing down. I had carried her absence for 10 years like a shard of glass in my ribs. Reading her words felt like holding that shard, knowing it would pierce the same place again. I couldn't sit still. I walked through the apartment, the paper crumpled slightly in my hands, each step echoing the memory of that day in Samarkand. The desert, the explosions, the white heat of the blast. Camilla's face, fleeting yet eternal in my mind. Something clicked. A memory I had tried to bury surfaced, the file in the archives, locked behind my father's credentials. The code, the redacted reports, the missing letters. Everything he had touched, everything he had hidden led back to him. Rafael Maldonado, my father. I sank into a chair, the envelope between my knees. The room felt smaller than it had when I first arrived. The city outside was quiet, almost respectful, waiting for me to make my move. I folded the letters neatly and tucked them into my coat. Proof could not wait. I began tracing back every access point in the Sentinel logs, comparing timestamps, cross-referencing email archives, and old military communications. The more I uncovered, the more the pattern emerged. My father had been the architect of silence, the manipulator of information, the one who had kept my mother's vision and Camilla's final words from reaching me. I left the apartment with the drive and the letters, moving swiftly through streets that now seemed strangely familiar, though I had not walked them in years. Each corner, each alley, each shadow reminded me of what it felt like to be unseen, to be erased. At the old family home, I waited until the sun dipped low enough to soften the glare off the white walls. The door creaked when I opened it, a sound I had memorized since childhood. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. A few framed photographs leaned against the walls, some faces smiling, some frowning. Among them, my mother's face caught the light just so, a silent witness. I found the study. The desk was covered in files, some open, some stacked neatly. I spread the letters across the surface, letting the morning light illuminate every line. Every word from my mother and from Camilla now held weight. The letters were more than memories, they were a map, a path toward the truth that had been buried by my father's need to control the narrative. For a long time, I simply sat there, staring at the words. I could almost hear Camilla's voice whispering from the paper. I could almost feel my mother's hand resting on my shoulder, guiding me forward. The weight of 10 years, the injustice, the betrayal, the absence, all condensed into a single thought. I could not let this end in silence again. I had to act. The next steps would not be easy. My father's reach extended beyond the walls of this house, beyond the city, beyond the very networks I had helped build. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. I had a mission once more, not of obedience, not of orders, but of justice, of truth. I tucked the letters and the drive into my bag and left the study. Outside, the city was settling into dusk. Streetlights flickered on, their glow reflected in puddles of rain. I walked without looking back. Every step felt heavier than before, but also charged with purpose. The first piece of the puzzle was in my hands. The next would require finding the rest. And this time, I would not let anyone, not even my father, dictate the story. The night was almost complete when I returned to my apartment, but sleep felt like a distant memory, an old friend who no longer recognized me. I placed the letters and the drive on my desk and powered up the laptop. The room glowed with the familiar hum of circuits and soft light from the city that pooled through the blinds. Everything felt alive and waiting, almost as if the walls themselves knew the secrets I carried. I began tracing the envelope back to the archive system where it had been intended to arrive. Every keystroke and line of code felt like a step deeper into a cave I had once been afraid to enter. The timestamp discrepancies were glaring. Every access record my father could have controlled was marked with a signature I recognized, the precise and patient hand of Rafael Maldonado. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Files had been moved, letters withheld, reports altered. It wasn't just bureaucratic oversight, it was deliberate. Every document I recovered told the same story. A father hiding the truth, preserving a facade, and keeping me from my mother's vision, from Camilla's words, from my own understanding of what had happened in Samarkand. I sifted through the encrypted files until I found the one that had been almost erased, the original operational report. My name was there, marked as the officer who disobeyed orders. The child saved. Camilla listed as heroically covering for me. The words were clear. The truth had existed once, and someone had buried it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Every heartbeat sounded like a drumbeat marking the passage of time I could never reclaim. The letters in my pocket felt alive now, pulsing with the weight of what they contained. I could no longer allow them to remain hidden. I knew where I needed to go next: the military archives. The files were in a storage facility under the old defense building, guarded but not impenetrable. I had spent months building code to navigate Sentinel's own systems. Now it was time to apply that skill to uncover the truth about my own life. I left the apartment carrying nothing but the drive and the letters. The streets of Madrid were quiet, the late-night air sharp against my face. I moved quickly, shadows hugging my path. Each step carried a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The child's face from Samarkand floated in my mind, her eyes wide, her trust absolute. I owed her, I owed Camilla, I owed myself. Arriving at the archives, I studied the access points and security routines. The building was deserted at this hour, the guards patrolling in predictable loops. Using the credentials I had recovered and a series of backdoor scripts I had written over the years, I bypassed the first layer of authentication. The second layer required patience and precision, tracing network patterns to anticipate triggers. I felt the familiar thrill of a challenge, the way it had once coursed through me during field operations, before rules and orders had made me invisible. Inside, the hum of servers and the cold air felt like a sanctuary. I connected the drive to one of the terminals and began the extraction process. Files unfolded like petals, revealing correspondence, internal reports, and the documents that my father had hidden for so long. Every recovered item felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Hours passed. The glow of the monitors illuminated dust particles in the air, floating like ghosts caught between light and darkness. I discovered letters from Camilla that had never reached me, her words written in confidence and hope, sealed and misplaced by those who sought to control her story. Each one hit like a pulse of light through a dense fog. And then I found it, a series of memos stamped with my father's initials. The documents were meticulous. Every alteration, every withheld letter, every misdirected report was accounted for. Rafael Maldonado had been orchestrating this for years, carefully shaping a narrative in which I did not exist as the hero. He had hidden my mother's vision, my mentor's words, even the truth about Samarkand. My hands shook as I scrolled through the final files. The betrayal was almost unbearable. The man I had once trusted as family had not only erased my record, but had attempted to erase the memory of my courage, my choices, and the lives I had touched. I took a deep breath and gathered the letters and the drive, closing the terminal. The weight of responsibility settled over me, heavier than the years of absence, heavier than fear. I knew the next step would require confrontation, strategy, and courage. I was no longer the girl who had followed orders blindly. I was the woman who would reclaim the truth. Outside, the night had deepened. The streets were empty, the city a silent witness. I walked back through the shadows, every step measured, carrying the evidence of hidden lives, hidden truths, and hidden betrayals. In my pocket, the letters pressed against me, a reminder of what I must do. I would face my father. I would reveal Duart's manipulations. I would expose every lie that had kept me in silence. And I would do it on my own terms, because for the first time, silence was no longer an option. The night air felt colder now, sharper, as if sensing the storm to come. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the weight of the drive, the letters, and the memory of Samarkand. Somewhere beyond the city, the wind carried echoes of past decisions and future confrontations. I tightened my jaw and let it guide me forward. The mission had changed. The battlefield was no longer a desert. It was a network, a city, and the hidden corridors of my family's own making, and I would not fail. The first thing I noticed when I returned to my apartment was how small it felt, not physically, but morally. The walls pressed in, the ceiling leaned closer. The letters and drives sat on my desk like a coiled promise. I could no longer ignore what I had uncovered. Duart had been pulling strings, shaping Sentinel, hiding the alpha key in plain sight. My father had been the gatekeeper, but Duart, the man I had once respected, almost trusted, was the architect. I plugged in the external drive, my fingers moving with a nervous rhythm I had not felt since Samarkand. The files opened like windows to another world. Sentinel logs, internal memos, subroutine schematics, timestamps aligned across continents. At first, it was chaos, millions of lines of code, annotations in Duart's handwriting, hidden markers I recognized from my own early designs. Then I saw it, a trace of the alpha key embedded deep in the neural net, not just a reference but an active override. Duart had rewritten my work to control the system. Every alert, every response, every prediction could now be manipulated. My heart beat faster. It wasn't just the code, it was evidence of intent. He had been orchestrating outcomes for years, shaping the network, shaping events, shaping lives. I ran backtraces, mapped every interaction, every file transfer, every masked protocol. It all led to the same conclusion. Duart was not an advisor. He was the hidden hand, the silent manipulator. Every time someone thought they were acting independently, they were stepping through a pathway he had built. Every anomaly I had seen since returning, every flash of alpha key, every ghostly ping in the system was his. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. My apartment felt too small to contain the truth. I needed space, distance. I grabbed my coat and walked without thinking. The city was quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional car that hissed through puddles left from the afternoon rain. I walked to the old cafe near the park, the one with the metal tables and cracked tiles, the one Camilla had once claimed was the best for late-night coffee and strategy sessions. I sat, my bag on the table, and opened the drive. The screen glowed dimly. I traced every code snippet, cross-referenced every timestamp, and highlighted anomalies. Lines of code I had written years ago were now embedded with Duart's override signature. Every move I had made had been anticipated, guided, or observed by him. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I realized then that Duart had not just orchestrated the network, he had orchestrated me. Every step I had taken since the card, every minor test, every probe I had run, he had designed the system to watch me, to learn from me, to shape me. I closed my eyes and remembered the desert, the radio, the alpha key, Camilla's face. Everything I had buried inside myself for 10 years now pressed against me, demanding recognition. I would not be used. I would not be silenced. I returned to the apartment and began compiling evidence. Reports, logs, letters, timestamped communications, everything that proved Duart's manipulation. I organized it carefully, creating a trail that could not be erased. The task was enormous, but I worked with precision, every line of code, every document a brick in the fortress I was building. Night fell again. The city lights painted the walls orange, the glow reflecting on the metal edges of my laptop. I leaned back, breathing heavily, feeling the weight of what I had discovered. Duart was no longer just a memory from the past, he was an active force I had to confront. Somewhere in the city, my father slept, unaware that his control was only partial. Duart had outmaneuvered him, using my father's authority as a shield. It was a network of lies and manipulation that extended beyond the walls of my family, beyond Aegis, beyond Sentinel itself. I realized the mission had changed. It was no longer just about uncovering the truth for Camilla or for my mother. It was about exposing Duart, reclaiming the system I had built, and taking back control from the man who had hidden behind my own code. I pulled out a blank notebook and began to outline the plan. I wrote in short phrases, fragmented sentences, capturing every anomaly, every connection, every signature that linked Duarte to the hidden override. The plan had to be meticulous. One wrong move, and the evidence could be deleted, the network could cover itself again, and I would be back to being invisible. By the time dawn broke, I had a map, a series of connections, and a strategy to confront Duarte. I stepped outside, the cold morning air hitting my face like a wake-up call. I walked briskly through the quiet streets, the city slowly awakening. Every step felt like a promise. I would not be erased again. I would reclaim Sentinel. I would uncover Duarte. And I would ensure that the truth, once buried, would finally be seen. I arrived at the Aegis mainframe just as the last traces of dawn painted the sky silver. The building looked innocuous from the outside, glass and steel reflecting the quiet city, but inside it was a labyrinth of shadows, hums, and blinking lights that felt alive. I moved quickly, my bag pressed against me, the drive and letters concealed inside. Every corridor was familiar yet strange. The place had grown, added floors, expanded networks, but the pattern remained. I could navigate it like a memory. At the terminal, I began tracing the alpha key override, moving slowly, deliberately. Every subroutine I examined led back to a central node, hidden behind layers of encryption that bore Duarte's signature. The traces were subtle but unmistakable. Every override he implemented, every path he masked, every anomaly in the logs had his fingerprints. I felt a chill. He had been controlling Sentinel, shaping it with invisible hands, directing outcomes, observing without revealing himself. He had anticipated every probe, every test I had run, every attempt to understand the system from the outside. He had been there all along, watching, learning, waiting. I paused, staring at the screen. A part of me wanted to shut it down, to leave the evidence buried, to pretend the network was still mine. But I couldn't. The letters from Camilla, my mother's words, the memory of Samarkand, everything demanded action. I dug deeper. Each folder I opened, each timestamp I cross-checked, revealed more of Duarte's network of influence. Hidden communications between him and military advisors, protocols masked as routine updates, Sentinel modules altered to feed selective information. He had created a network that manipulated truth itself. And he had embedded it all into a system I had once believed was mine, trusted, clean. Hours passed like seconds. The hum of the servers became a background pulse in my chest. I extracted the relevant files, documenting every anomaly, recording every signature that pointed to Duarte. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the realization of how close I had been to being used without my knowledge, how easily my work could have been turned against those I had tried to protect. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the memory of the desert flood in. The explosions, the dust, Camilla's voice, every fragment connected to this moment. The alpha key from Samarkand had never been random. Duarte had planned this all along. He had hidden behind my father's authority, using him as a shield, ensuring I would never see the truth until it was too late. I reopened my eyes and typed a single command, activating a sandboxed version of Sentinel. I traced every override, mapping Duarte's manipulations in real time. The system was vast, interconnected, and terrifyingly intelligent. It was no longer a tool, it was a mirror of Duarte's mind, a reflection of his control. Then I found the final layer, the one that tied everything together. A hidden file, buried beneath years of code, labeled simply Control Node DRT. My stomach dropped. Duarte's initials. He had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, controlling outcomes, observing reactions, ensuring no one but him knew the full scope of Sentinel's power. I sat back, breathing heavily. The full scope of his manipulation hit me. He had turned my creation into a mechanism of control, using it to guide events and people without their knowledge. The system I had built to protect, to predict, to save, had been rewritten to serve him. I realized that this was more than a network. It was a map of his influence, a record of every decision he had touched, every life he had silently altered. And now, I held the key to exposing it. I gathered all the files, encrypting them, making backups. Every log, every email, every code snippet that proved his manipulation. I had the evidence, but I needed a way to confront him. Not just digitally, but in a way that would make the truth undeniable. I left the mainframe building, the city stretching silent and gray before me. My mind was racing, planning the next steps. I could feel the weight of every action, every choice I had made leading to this moment. Duarte had played the game for years, but I had found the board and I was ready to move the pieces. I paused at the street corner, the early morning air sharp against my skin. Somewhere beyond the city, unseen and unknowing, he was still moving his pieces. But I had the advantage now. I had the truth and I had the fire to act. For the first time in a decade, I felt the pulse of certainty. The battlefield had changed, but I knew how to fight. This time, I would not be silenced. This time, Duarte's control would meet the counter he never expected. The Alpha Key had led me here, but now it would lead me to justice. The morning of the hearing, Madrid felt like a city holding its breath. I stepped out of my apartment before dawn, coat pulled tight, drive and letters secure in my bag. Every street seemed emptier than it should be, the pavement reflecting the first silver light as if the city itself was a witness. I walked quickly, my boots silent, mind rehearsing the words I would say, the evidence I would show, the truth I would finally unveil. The ministry building loomed above, a fortress of marble and glass. Inside, the air smelled of polish and anticipation. Reporters and officials filed in, their murmurs a constant hum. I passed the checkpoints, presented identification, and felt a flash of the old discipline that had been trained into me. My father's eyes found me in the crowd. Rafael Maldonado. The same man who had orchestrated silence, the same man who had buried letters and reports, now sat waiting, a mask of composure stretched over old regrets. The gavel struck. Silence fell. The hearing began with formalities, introductions, a recital of names and titles. I watched, focusing on the papers in front of me. Every line, every timestamp, every coded subroutine I had uncovered, all of it pointed to one person: Duarte. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, letting my presence be seen. The room seemed to contract. All eyes, from colleagues to journalists, turned toward me. I held up the letters, the drive, and the printed logs. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "what you see here is not speculation. It is evidence. Evidence that the Sentinel system has been manipulated for years by a single individual. Evidence that the network I built to protect has been turned into a tool of control, observation, and secrecy." A murmur ran through the room. Duarte's face remained calm, unreadable. My father shifted slightly in his seat, his mask faltering for the briefest second. I went through the documents, the letters from Camilla, the original operational report from Samarkand, the Alpha Key override logs. Each piece of evidence told the story of how truth had been buried, lives erased, and a network weaponized for one man's control. When I finished, I looked directly at Duarte. "You have orchestrated this system for years. You used my work, my knowledge, my loyalty. You hid the letters, you altered reports, you erased lives, and now it ends." For the first time, his composure cracked. A slight twitch in his jaw, a flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The room held its breath. My father finally spoke, his voice low, almost uncertain. "Julieta," I did not flinch. "You enabled this and you stayed silent, but I am here now. The truth will be known and the system you controlled will no longer operate in secrecy." A reporter asked a question, but I ignored it. The evidence was displayed on screens, projected to everyone present. Logs, timestamps, letters, code. The proof was undeniable. Duarte's manipulation could not be denied or hidden. The board deliberated. Minutes felt like hours. I stood, holding the drive, feeling the weight of the last 10 years in my hands. Then the chair of the hearing spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, the manipulations of the Sentinel system are confirmed. Captain Julieta Maldonado has been cleared of all accusations, and the integrity of her work is restored." I exhaled. Relief was tempered by anger and memory. The room erupted into whispers, some shocked, some awed. My father looked down, silent, his influence diminished by the truth I had reclaimed. Duarte remained standing, silent, defeated in a way that no punishment could entirely express. I walked out of the hearing room into the corridor. The sunlight was blinding, but it felt like freedom. Every step I took echoed with a new rhythm, a cadence of reclamation. I had fought battles in silence, in shadows, in code, and now, for the first time, I had stood openly in the light. Outside the ministry, the city seemed to breathe with me. The wind carried the faintest hint of rain, washing the streets clean, as if an acknowledgement of the injustices that had finally been corrected. I clutched the drive, letters, and logs. Everything was still in my hands, but for the first time, I felt their weight was not a burden, but a key. The first phase of exposure was complete. The truth was now undeniable, but the journey was not over. There was a second, quieter victory to achieve, one that had nothing to do with bureaucracy and everything to do with honoring those who had trusted me, who had believed when the world had not. I turned toward the train, toward the streets I had walked so many times before, and for the first time, I felt a measure of peace. The next step awaited, and it would be mine to shape. The corridors of the ministry were still humming from the morning's deliberations when I stepped out into the sunlight. The air smelled of rain-soaked concrete and exhaust, sharp and clean. Journalists crowded the steps, microphones pointed toward anyone willing to speak, but I did not answer questions. I had nothing to say that the evidence had not already declared. Duarte stood at the far end of the plaza, motionless, a figure carved from years of power and precision. He met my gaze for a long second, unblinking, and I felt the weight of every decision he had made, every manipulation he had executed. For a moment, I thought of the desert, the Alpha Key, Camilla, and the silence that had haunted me for a decade. I walked toward him. My steps were deliberate, measured. The wind lifted my hair, carried dust along the plaza, and I felt the years fall away. When I stopped, we were only a few meters apart. "You took everything from me," I said quietly, letting my voice carry only far enough for him to hear. "You used my work, my name, my loyalty. You rewrote reality to suit your vision." He did not answer. His hands were clasped behind his back, posture perfect, as though discipline could erase what had been done. "You will not control the narrative anymore," I continued. "The letters, the logs, the Sentinel Code, all of it is in the open. The truth is no longer yours to shape." For a long moment, he said nothing. I could see the weight in his eyes, the realization that silence no longer served him. He had depended on my absence, on obedience, on the illusion of compliance. Now that facade had crumbled. I turned my gaze to my father. Rafael Maldonado stood at a distance, hands folded, eyes lowering when our eyes met. His influence, long wielded as authority, now seemed brittle. I felt no need for his words. The truth had already done what years of discipline could not. The reporters were still beyond the plaza, but I did not address them. The moment did not need amplification. I had exposed the hidden manipulation, reclaimed my role, and corrected the record. That was enough. The hearing had restored my rank, my name, my authority, but more importantly, it had restored my voice. The silence that had haunted me, that had allowed the lies to persist, had been broken. I felt a calm I had not known since leaving Samarkand, a sense of purpose that was neither borrowed nor coerced. Duarte finally shifted, his expression unreadable, and walked away. The weight of his control no longer pressed on me. The city stretched around me, indifferent yet somehow attentive, reflecting a world that had moved past deception. I descended the plaza steps and let the sunlight warm my face. I carried the letters, the drive, and the evidence like armor, proof that could never be erased again. The streets were alive, but I was no longer merely moving through them. I was walking with intention, with certainty. The next stage awaited, quieter but no less important, rebuilding what had been lost, honoring those who had trusted me, and reclaiming the spaces where truth could flourish. The mission had changed. It was no longer survival or obedience or compliance. It was restoration. I walked toward the train, toward the streets I had walked 1,000 times, and felt for the first time in years that the weight on my shoulders was not punishment, but a responsibility I could bear. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I carried the knowledge that the battle for truth had been won. The letters, Camilla's voice, the Alpha Key, and my mother's guidance, they would all live again through me. And the system that had been used to manipulate would serve as the evidence, the foundation for a world that would know the full story. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the cold morning air, letting the wind erase what could be forgiven and leaving intact what must be remembered. The silent hearing had ended, but the restoration had only just begun. The sun was low, painting the horizon in shades of gold and rose when I arrived at Casa Isabel for the first time. The land stretched before me like a promise, unbroken earth, open sky, and the faint smell of soil that had been untouched for years. I carried with me the letters, the drive, and the memory of every face that had been lost, hidden, or erased. I stepped onto the dirt path leading to the foundation, the loose gravel crunching softly under my boots. Workers moved in measured rhythms, setting wooden beams, adjusting concrete molds, their hands steady, their eyes attentive. None of them asked who I was, because in that moment it didn't matter. The work itself was what mattered. I set down my bag and pulled out the letters. Camilla's words, my mother's instructions, every note from those who had trusted me, were placed carefully in a small box at the center of the construction site. I closed my eyes and imagined them looking over my shoulder, nodding in approval, smiling in relief. The first woman approached me. She had dark hair pulled into a tight braid, her hands rough from years of labor. She looked at me with eyes that carried recognition without knowing my name. I understood. Casa Isabel was meant for those who had been overlooked, those whose voices had been muted. She nodded once, a silent welcome, and returned to her work. I walked along the perimeter, feeling the texture of the soil, the firmness of the concrete under my fingers. I thought of the desert, of the child, of Camilla, and of the years spent tracing every hidden document, every manipulated code line. All of it had led to this moment: construction, creation, restoration. At midday, the sun warmed my back as I climbed onto a partially built wall. The air smelled of wet cement and early grass growth. I looked out across the property and felt the weight of responsibility, the gravity of what this place could become. It was more than a building. It was a sanctuary, a reclamation, a proof that the truth could survive even when buried for a decade. A small girl appeared, running across the foundation, her hair red and wind-tossed. She stopped before me, eyes wide, a mixture of curiosity and recognition. She held out her hand, a simple gesture, and I took it. There was no need for introductions. Her mother's face, the one I had carried in memory, flickered in my mind. Camilla had trusted me, and now in this child's gaze I felt that trust renewed. The workers paused as I spoke quietly to the girl, words soft but clear. This place is for everyone who was forgotten, everyone who needs a home. Her eyes sparkled and she nodded. I felt a strange warmth, the kind that spreads through the chest and settles in the bones. I placed the letters back in their box, burying them gently beneath a layer of soil at the base of a central pillar. It felt ceremonial. Each one a memory, a life restored, a promise kept. The day wore on, the light shifting, shadows lengthening. I worked alongside the women, lifting bricks, smoothing cement, tracing lines that would become walls. My hands were raw, my muscles tired, but the effort was grounding. Every motion reminded me that I was alive, that I was present, that I could build rather than merely remember. By evening, the first phase of construction was complete. I stood at the center of Casa Isabel, the horizon stretching endless and forgiving. I breathed in the cool air, tasting freedom and responsibility in the same inhale. The letters, the evidence, the memories, they were all here, interwoven into the foundation of something real. I looked to the girl, now sitting on a beam, swinging her legs. "Someday," I whispered, "you'll see this place thrive." And for the first time in years, I smiled freely, the kind of smile that doesn't hesitate, that doesn't weigh itself against memory or guilt. Casa Isabel was more than a name. It was a declaration, a conclusion, a beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured over Casa Isabel, turning the freshly poured concrete into warm gold. I walked along the paths we had laid, tracing the edges of the building with my fingertips, feeling every imperfection, every curve, every line. This place was no longer just soil and bricks. It was a map of hope, a testament to the lives that had been hidden, erased, or silenced. Workers moved around me, laughter and chatter filling the space that had been quiet yesterday. I watched them without speaking, letting the energy wash over me. It was strange, this feeling of belonging, of not being alone in purpose. Each hand moving a tool, each voice contributing to the rhythm of creation. It reminded me of Camilla, her laughter in the desert before everything went wrong, her trust, her courage. I returned to the small box at the center of the site, where the letters and evidence had been buried. I dug gently, lifting the papers one by one, feeling the edges, reading the familiar words. Camilla's message, my mother's guidance, the operational reports, everything had survived. I let the letters rest against my chest for a moment, remembering the hands that had written them, the voices that had spoken through them, and the years of silence they had endured. A young woman approached me, her hair tied in a loose braid, her eyes shining with curiosity. She carried a small bundle of tools in her hands. "I want to help," she said softly. I nodded, handing her a trowel. She smiled, and the gesture carried the weight of trust. We worked together, side by side, shaping the foundation, smoothing the walls. I felt every movement, every effort, every thought connected to the past, but also to the future. Casa Isabel was not just a building. It was a bridge between what had been lost and what could be reclaimed. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, a small figure approached, red hair, wide eyes, the girl I had met yesterday. She held out a drawing, a simple sketch of the house with figures standing around it, hands joined. "This is for everyone," she said. I took the paper and smiled. "Yes," I whispered, "for everyone." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and rain. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the city fade into the background, leaving only the quiet heartbeat of the foundation beneath my feet. The alpha key, Duart's manipulations, the years of silence, they no longer had power over me. The truth was restored. And then, in the stillness, I felt a presence, subtle but undeniable. A small metal box left at the edge of the construction site, stamped with a faint, familiar insignia. I opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of the original Sentinel schematics, annotated by Duart along with a single note: use it wisely. Some ghosts leave tools, not chains. I looked out over Casa Isabel, the young workers, the child, the horizon stretching endlessly. The twist of truth, the evidence of manipulation, the revelation of hidden control, it had all led to this. Not vengeance, not anger, but restoration, reclamation, and the quiet satisfaction of justice fulfilled. I placed the schematics carefully beside the letters. They would serve as a reminder, a tool, a warning, and a gift. And then I stepped back, letting the sun wash over me, letting the wind lift my hair, letting the city breathe with me. Casa Isabel was alive now, not because of walls or plans, but because it carried the stories of those who had been lost and the hands of those willing to rebuild. I had survived the desert, the manipulation, the silence, and now I could finally be present, fully and without apology, for the first time in my life. The child ran across the foundation again, laughing, drawing invisible lines with her fingers. I followed her gaze, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the past lift completely. The letters, the evidence, the alpha key, they were no longer ghosts in my life. They were guides, reminders, and bridges to a future I could build. Casa Isabel was no longer just a place. It was a promise kept. I breathed deeply, the wind carrying the scent of earth, cement, and hope. The city hummed softly in the distance. I smiled fully, finally, and let the day embrace me. The mission was complete. The truth was no longer hidden. And for the first time, I felt whole.